to a new episode of the Between Two Bots podcast. My name is Mark van Rijmenam, and in this podcast we discuss the cultural, technological, ethical implications of artificial intelligence and AI-based decisions. A discussion that we think is so important to have as it affects us all. Our relationship with machines is changing, and we move from human to machines and machine to machines interactions. And AI is becoming more and more pervasive and has a bigger impact on our life and the way we work. I'm joined by my co-host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, investor, board member, and passionate about AI ethics. Good to have you here again, Dan. Who do we have on the show today?
Mark, it's good to be here. I've been so looking forward to this one. I get to hang out with one of my friends and discuss some of the topics that I care most about. DEI, as we all know, the acronym Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is really more than just kind of an acronym du jour. It's also what I call a mindset that really impacts the quality of AI. Diverse teams, it should come as no surprise, are more likely to do things like screen for data bias. They're more likely to design inclusive algorithms. They're more likely to detect poor decisions. Very few people actually work at the intersection of DEI and AI. Today, we're lucky to have one of the foremost thinkers on both topics. My friend Kai Núñez is the Vice President of Research and Insights at Salesforce. Salesforce has more than 150,000 customers, more than 55,000 employees. There really aren't many bigger or more impactful platforms on which to exercise responsible AI coupled with a DEI mindset. The decisions that Kai and her team make influence how software and AI are used literally by hundreds of millions of people every day. Before Salesforce, Kai had a distinguished career as an experienced designer and researcher at companies like Microsoft and Capgemini. She started her journey at Salesforce nearly 12 years ago. Listen and learn today to how principled thinkers really can influence company strategy and ensure that AI is practiced responsibly. Every enterprise, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, needs a Kai Núñez to build a culture of ethical awareness. I think within the next 40 to 45 minutes, you will understand why. Mark, you want to kick us off with the first article that we'll be reviewing?
Definitely. So welcome on the show, Kai. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for the delightful introduction, Dan.
So, it's been for those listeners who have followed us in the past weeks, it's a tradition that we start our podcast with three articles that we want to discuss. Articles that have been in the news that cover AI ethics and related topics. And I think we found some very interesting articles this time again. The first article is from the website Montreal AI Ethics, and the title of the article is AI Ethics Enter the Dragon. The article discusses how China recently released their what they call it the new generation of artificial intelligence code of ethics, and it's quite interesting to see a country that does not have a very particularly strong track record, at least from a Western point of view, to be releasing a code of ethics on AI. Especially with the state surveillance that's happening in Xinjiang province, their social credit scores system that they have, two systems that recently in the EU have been banned from being implemented by the European countries. So the author discusses the chapters, including what within the code of ethics, including the ethical norms that individuals and organizations should follow, ranging from enhancing human well-being, promoting fairness and justice, ensuring controllability and credibility, strengthening responsibility, and improving ethical literacy. Very important topics to be included in a code of ethics. But the author also states that this code of ethics has been very loosely drafted, and it seems that it didn't really undergo any revision. What is your point about China releasing such a code of ethics, and is there something that we can learn from it, Kai?
Well, it's interesting because when you shared the article with me, the first thing that I did is I thought, yes, it might be a little poorly worded. It might be a clear first draft. There might be some political nuances and machinations that have triggered its publication. But then I went and I did a search for United States ethical guidelines. Then I did a search for United States AI and ethics. And I did another search, US AI ethics. And I found no guidelines. What I did find was the Department of Defense's guidelines that they had published and our commitment to the G20 European guidelines. But I was surprised to not have that sort of counterpoint where I could actually do a comparison between something that was launched by China and also what we in the United States have launched. Now, as you're well aware, our technology companies, such as my own company, Salesforce, IBM, and others, have put forth their own guidelines and sort of are leading the charge in defining what the frameworks might be around delivering and developing basically these AI ethical guidelines at large, writ large. Oftentimes there are sort of lenses of what we've seen in the EU. Some are ground up, built to tailored to those companies so that they can ensure increased adoption. So it's hard for me to disparage China for having produced something when what I see is corporate America in parts taking the stances that I believe are the right stances, the right directions for building products. And then I'm not seeing the same very clearly annotated guidelines from the United States government other than the Department of Defense.
That's a good take, Kai. That's provocative that we're applauding China for its stance on AI, when clearly, the author was trying to make us, demonize China, maybe for, trying to usurp the rest of the world by telling us how we should practice AI responsibly. The next article we wanted to cover has a similar theme, and I'd love to get your take on this from previous conversations we've had. It's actually a blog posted by Ericsson, the international conglomerate. And title is AI Bias in Human Rights, Why Ethical AI Matters. And one of the themes that I thought was interesting is the author talks about how human bias is invariably encoded in AI. And then in the same paragraph, it goes on to say, maybe it's the case that emerging AI-powered systems could, in fact, liberate us from thousands of years of human bias. Those are, very contradictory ideas. Which side do you take? Are you taking the over or the under on the role AI will play in reducing human bias?
I would love to be so optimistic that a system of intelligence would liberate us from bias and live in the future state of a Star Trek wherein everything is gender neutral and everyone loves each other and they love even other alien species equally to themselves, perhaps not the Klingons at the start. But the reality, in my opinion, is that humans are fallible and anything that's built by us is going to be fallible. And so then it's our responsibility to try to mitigate the failures of the things that we build. And oftentimes they're the things that we're building and we're building them with the best of intentions. And they might be too short-sighted, and as a consequence, they've done harm. And this applies to anything that a human builds, regardless of whether or not there's AI in the scale that has been draped upon it. So I think to answer your question, Dan, whilst I would love that utopian future state, I recognize that there's also power in the fact that humans are fallible and we are biased. And as long as we are able to recognize that and then redirect and manage that risk, we can use it as a source of authority, power, influence. You can't necessarily build something well if you don't know where your failures and your deficits are.
So it's possible that AI amplifies human bias, but it certainly won't make it worse, and it probably won't make it better. Get on your soapbox for a minute and tell us what will lead to reducing human bias.
Well, what will lead to reducing human bias writ large? Boy, wouldn't it be great if we would all think about each other and the implications of the decisions that we make first before we embark upon them, right? And if that were a part of just the human code, And it's not the explicitly do no harm, because in some cases that may not apply. Um, but ultimately just to be thoughtful, and to bring that through all of the things that you bring to the world in terms of the work that you're engaging upon, right? And the way that I do that at Salesforce is, I ask the questions: should we build this? And if we're going to build it, does it literally have to be built using AI? Does it? Or can we use something else? Like, could it just be automation and RPA? It doesn't have to be AI. Cool. The risks are mitigated or managed a little bit more. But oh my God, we have to use AI. All right, so I understand you really want to use AI. Then are you willing to take all of the responsibility that comes with that? And if you are, then let us proceed upon that journey, because it's not an easy journey. It is a journey that is fraught with stakeholder management, with thinking about frameworks in the way that you're actually applying the work that you're doing, the thing that you're building, and then thinking about the unintended consequences, thinking about the unmet needs, thinking about those individuals that you did not mean to harm, but you might unintentionally harm. That's I think the risk that many people don't realize out the gate that is inherent with building AI systems. And I think that the momentum behind all of these ethical practices that are being brought up and built within corporations, that is probably their biggest success, that they have brought the risk to light, and there's conversation around it and documentation and research at scale that indicates, yes, think first before you build with AI.
Well, I think that's a great statement. That I think it's wise to slow down a bit, and think before we act. I think if that would apply to all humans and all organizations, I think the world would be a better place, I would say. But it's also a very nice bridge to the third article that we have, which is where Timnit Gebru, a well-known leading AI ethics voice, he says that big tech is doing it all wrong, and they need to slow down on AI. So it's an article which was originally published on Wired, and Gebru basically says that let the researchers build the technology they know must be built, and not so much the for-profit companies who might have a different driver for creating the AI, and are less inclined to slow down a little bit, and just to rush to get the AI out without thinking of all the different consequences. Of course, you work for Salesforce, which we can, I think, consider as a big tech firm. What do you think about that we need to change the drivers for creating ever more advanced AI? And you already mentioned that we need to slow down, but is there a way we can also slow down the drive for continuous profit when it comes to AI, and take a different approach to developing AI?
Well, I'm not an economist. And I'm more of an armchair pundit, right? And I have deep respect for Timnit Gebru. For this article in particular, I thought that the title was a little clickbaity, right? Because I didn't really see the manifestation of that, like, tech shouldn't do this thing, and her like pounding that drum in the content contained therein. So recognizing that, I can speak to your question, which is, I feel as if these large tech companies are responsible for whatever it is that they build, period, right? There's this tension, of course, of wanting to build the next best thing. And I wear two hats as a researcher. I recognize that the bulk of the work that I do actually is uncovering new opportunities. And so when I see the opportunity to build something novel, new, that is truly going to deliver against unmet needs, I get excited. And I understand the impetus behind wanting to build something cool that will meet people's needs and, make money too. because I have bills to pay, right? And then the corporation has bill to pay. Now, I understand that is like a very narrow perspective, right? We're not talking about my personal needs. We're talking about the fact that these large multinational organizations are making money hand over fist, and that they're creating this sort of like large, disparate oligarchies as a consequence of the finance that is being just drummed through their systems, right? I get all of that. And so, yes, of course, because of the immense responsibility that they have and the largesse of their companies, they may not think first about the large scale implications of artificial intelligence. And yes, it is the responsibility of these ethical AI teams to help meter that race for the dollar by putting in these guardrails and frameworks and guidelines for these corporations to deliver against. But I don't necessarily agree with a researcher only AI built experience of models. And why don't I agree with that? Because it kind of flies in the face of the whole value of diversity and inclusion and equity and having diverse thinking and experiences in a room when you're building a product, right? And if you're only building something with the rigor of academia and research, and I think that's like hypothetical, right? I don't believe that Dimnit's saying that, but that's sort of like the point counterpoint. That, in my opinion, that would never be truly successful. It's almost like just having a research science team build the things and like, oh, this is great, this is so cool, I love this model, it was awesome, and it did the thing. How do you monetize that? How do you get paid for that work? How do you bring in other voices so that you can see the add-on value of the thing that you're building? How might you even consider making it even sustainable? Like, these are the things that I think about. So yes, it needs to be there needs to be some framework to have like more rigor, but I do think it needs to be in conjunction with the needs of the user and the needs of the market.
Hey, Kai, we want to move into the next section where Mark and I have some questions for you just to give the audience a chance to get to know you and how you think a little better. And my first question for you is, there are many listeners out there who work for companies that would love to have the kind of, air quotes, Ohana culture that Salesforce has, that I'm going to go out on a limb and say kind of enables you to ask some of the questions that you ask, like the ones you shared earlier. To those companies aspiring to maybe emulate Salesforce, how would you describe the attributes of the culture that embrace, some of the principles of DEI and responsible AI?
I think a core cultural trait that drives this construct of Ohana, and it's a word that I don't use, and it's sort of been minimized generally at Salesforce due to the cultural appropriation of the word. But the sentiment is the same, which is Salesforce has a family. Salesforce is your family. They will take care of you when things go wrong and awry. They'll provide great services for you to be able to be successful, and they'll create an environment for you to be able to work where you feel safe. Now, obviously, everybody knows the adage that like a good company is a good manager. So when I'm speaking now, it's in broad strokes. I can't state and exclaim that every manager at Salesforce is amazing and faultless, right? And everyone ascribes to the values of Salesforce. That's just it cannot be a truism. We talked about people being fallible to begin with, so we know that holds true. But the culture of transparency at Salesforce really allows for the community of Salesforce to feel like they can have their voices heard. When your executives publish the vision of what they're going to build for next year, months before planning begins, so that they can get equal participation in the planning process, that is a great signal for those who are at the company, coming in from other companies, to see, wow, this is a little different. When we have Slack channels where you can actually give feedback to the executives when they may have misspoken on a call, that is a transparent culture. when you have the opportunity within those same Slack channels to have open dialogue from different moral perspectives and then still be able to get your job done, that creates that reinforces the sort of understanding that you have this framework of, I can be myself within this environment. I can execute against it. And so therefore, it might be easier for us to put forth some of these programs that allow for a different way of thinking. And our ethical use program and now office and is one example of that. But we also have our ERG groups, which are employee resource groups, that have sprouted up all over the company since I've joined 10 years ago, that span everything from GenForce, which is like people of a certain age, to FaithForce, which is a delightful organization that creates dialogue, open dialogue between different religions within the company. So all of that said, I believe that these are the smaller things, like the bottoms up and the top down, that reinforces the culture so that then you can have these type of, more progressive initiatives and approach to build technology.
I think it's great to hear that Salesforce has this open culture where you can have this transparent discussion. And I'm actually curious to hear, because you mentioned that you now have an ethical AI office within Salesforce. What are some of the discussions that take place within that office when it comes to ethical AI?
Well, I'm not a part of the committee, but I do work and I extol their virtues and values. And the way that I partner with that team is in support through research and through deep product partnership, because part of the ethical frameworks that have been built has woven research into sort of the methodology. As we continue to go down the path of our sort of ethical AI maturity journey, one of the critical parts of that is to ensure that you are really considering the voice of those that are impacted by the products that you're building, and those that you don't intend to have use your product as a part of the way that you're building your product. So that's what my team does. We execute against log data and interviews with our customers, internal interviews with our internal stakeholders to ensure that we have a good representation and multiple data signals to help drive business solutions. But our core offering is to be respectful truth tellers. And so in doing so, we have to have a foundation of data at scale, but feel very confident that that data is representing the population accurately and their needs accurately. And we take that very seriously. So that's the way that my team partners with the Office of Ethical Use. With respect to ethics and AI at Salesforce, I see it. It's interesting. It's multidimensional, right? It's a practice. It's a framework. It's a series of guidelines. It's a mindset. And for some people, it's sort of like a banner that they hold. And it's also features and products that we have within our product suite. And so with that constellation, it affords us the opportunity to continue to sort of like innovate and kind of blow up the construct of what ethical AI means. And instead of it just being ethical AI, it's just building ethical products. And then hopefully one day it's just building products. And we can scratch all the rest of the modifiers for that statement.
Well, I think it's fantastic to see that Salesforce, does have this approach to ethical products, and that AI is going to be a big part of that. Because I think what we see happening, of course, is that a lot of big tech here, they are an example for individuals, for customers, for smaller companies on how to deal with with this hot topic. And if the big tech don't do anything about ethical AI, why should I, as a small company, put extra money in to develop an AI that is a bit more unbiased? So what responsibility does big tech have for modeling this ethical behavior for smaller tech companies, looking at what big tech is doing?
Well, I think you know what I'm going to say, which is like, of course we're responsible. We are putting this technology out in the world. We have to shepherd it. And then we have to model good behavior so that those that follow also model good behavior. Salesforce has done this in other ways. I'll give you an example. So the pledge one model. So we have the pledge 1%, and then we have the 111 model. And the 111 model was built with the company from its very inception, where employees are asked and allowed to give 1% of their time. Salesforce gives 1% of their equity and gives 1% for grants. And so, isn't that awesome? Well, that's great for Salesforce. It's also an awesome marketing opportunity. But the better story behind that is that because of this work, many other software companies in the Bay Area in particular, and some in Europe, have followed this pledge 1% model and have incorporated it into the way that they are building their businesses, so that they're taking this sort of like corporations for good model forward. And the intent there, of course, is that maybe that will help shift the narrative on how corporations are supposed to show up to begin with. One of the adages we have is that we want to be in the business of being good and doing good business, right? And so that's what we're hoping for. And as a consequence of that, we bring a lot of humans to Salesforce who who aspire for the same outcome. And so it's this sort of self-fulfilling and prophecy to a certain degree, right? Where we are putting out there in the world what we want to aspire for and what we want to see just businesses and corporations to change towards. So modeling that good behavior, but then also that drives people to want to join Salesforce so that they too can take it forward should they start their own business. And I've seen that time and time again. I mean, I guess I've been there, I didn't realize, almost 12 years. So I've seen the spinoffs, and that for one is one of the things that really keeps me kind of happy and satisfied at Salesforce, because I can say that they're at a foundational level, they're really trying to manifest change in corporations and business at large.
So Kai, let's say going from kind of the more macro level to the micro level, we've got listeners who are trying to figure out how to kickstart a program to make their employers kind of more, let's say, ethically aware. Give us one example of something that you or your team have done recently that you consider a win that could serve as an example for other companies.
I think at the very basic level, it's really hard to start with guidelines and rules from the outset, right? People tend to react pretty negatively to that. No one wants to be told what to do. So oftentimes there has to be some sort of campaign for change. And then sort of embedding individuals in particular and the language of ethical frameworks in AI without actually saying ethical frameworks in AI, in my opinion, is probably the easiest way forward, right? You set an example, you ask the right questions at the right time. Going back to what I'd mentioned earlier, right? Do we have to build this? And if we have to build it, do we have to use AI? If we have to use AI, are you ready for the consequences that come with it from a builder's perspective? So those are the kind of questions that my team are empowered to ask as we're conducting research for the products that are either being conceived to go to market or that are already in market. And we're doing some maintenance and improvements. More importantly, and I think to your point, Dan, what my team is able to do and what makes me the happiest in terms of like continuing to like nudge our business in the right direction is always thinking about those actors and individuals, the humans and the machine, and bringing that to the forefront and having that be the North Star for the work that you're embarking upon. And I will give you an example. So I have a researcher on my team who has who's done a large scale study to really unpack like a future of what might be the sort of unified building experience at Salesforce. She could have just gone through a litany of here are all of the product features that are asked for, and these are the things that we need to deliver. But what she did instead was create empathy for the development and the administrating ecosystem and talked about guilt and talked about how we could humanize the experience so that we could take the burden of guilt away from the individuals that were working in the space and having a hard time building on our platform. And for me, those are signals that really reinforce the why behind the things that we're building, so that then we can continue to build better experiences in the short run, and maybe those in the long run that turns into better AI experiences writ large. So that's one example. I don't know if it was what you're looking for, but very, very tactical, and something I'm very proud of with my team, that they feel empowered to be able to build empathy and first, and then deliver a list of needs and product opportunities.
You shared with me previously a great story about how you rose awareness to management that a particular icon the company was using wasn't culturally sensitive. Maybe if you could quickly relay that story, I thought that was impactful and something I wouldn't have expected.
Yeah, it was an opportunity that I had I was actually serving sort of as a product project manager, in addition to being a research leader on one of our artificial intelligence solutions. And I had the opportunity, because the research had actually informed me that whilst the product was considered very valuable, it was very polarizing. And the reason it was polarizing was because, well, people, and you know the word Einstein, people didn't necessarily associate always positively with the term Einstein. And so it was my responsibility to effectively share that information with Mr. Benioff, so that he could make the decision that he needed to make around what would be the next steps with the product. As of right now, that product is not in market, but we still have many of the features and functionalities that were born of it. And so, the kind of the moral of the story is sort of telling truth to power, of course. But what I really take away from it is that we learn from our experiments and our failures. We're willing to pivot and kind of redefine what it means to build AI and AI products, while recognizing that it might not sit well with some, and then recanting and repositioning. And that's something that is, I think, the mark of a good product organization that's willing to make those changes, and then be successful because they were able to listen to our customers.
I think that's, it's if you listen to your customers. I always say, if you take care of your customers will take care of your shareholders. So if you do what's best for your customers, eventually that will be very good for for the business as well, for the shareholders. And I love the story that you have this process within Salesforce that you learn from your mistakes, or you're willing to pivot and you're willing to improve. I think that's a fantastic thing to hear, and I think a lot of organizations can learn from that. But when we take a step deeper into how can we create AI that is responsible, and how can we create products that are ethical? What kind of advice do you have for companies who also want to start that journey? Where should they start with ensuring that they create these ethical products?
I mean, it's a little bit of a gift to you. I would obviously, I say culture, right? Thinking about imbuing your culture with the capacity to be transparent and accountable is the first step. Because without that, the open dialogue can't happen. The other thing, and I'll go out on a limb here, is thinking about building your incentive model as you're building your technologies to not be limited to revenue exclusively, but to have that perfectly bounded and balanced by the value of the product and the customer impact, however you happen to collect that data. So that could be an NPS score for some, but I would go further and say you could have satisfaction scoring and super Q scores, other ways of balancing the value of a product. Why is that important? Because if your product teams are only incentivized by revenue, ACV, annualized revenue, whatever, subscription costs, et cetera, that's what they're going to build. So they're going to build to ship features. Build it and sell it, build it and sell it, build it and sell it, right? But if you're incentivized as well by building something that actually adds value and that is measured by your customers as being valuable and that they're happy with your product, to your point, the customer experience, the customers can help build your company, right? Then those two signals give a better incentive model for your product teams. Because now it's not just about building and shipping, it's about building the good thing, building the right thing, and then making money because you built the good thing that was right. That's where I'm hoping things move more towards. I see a lot more revenue-driven product development, and I think that oftentimes is what's really creating this machine of just build fast, deliver, deploy, take all the risks. It's okay, right? But building, like weaving in the human element from the outset and making that an actual criteria for success and measuring your teams on that, I think it would be a radical change.
Kai, you and I are both technologists, but we're also parents. And curious to get your perspective on this. So knowing what you know about how our data is used by enterprise software to make automated decisions, does it impact what kinds of things you let your son do on the internet? Or what kind of guidance do you give him as a consumer interacting with some of the technologies that you help develop?
I am so conflicted when it comes to this, honestly, because as a parent, I recognize, because of what you've just said, what is being captured when my son is using these technologies, particularly things like Roblox. Right? He's 9. He loves Roblox. There's this game where you slap each other, and he's like, "This is the best game ever. We just slap each other." I'm like, "This is just really distressing." And I know that they're collecting his data. And I know that data can be sold. But I'm also a mother who wants her child to be not yelling and screaming and like weeping, "Oh, I'm uncool. The other kids are playing Roblox and slapping each other and I'm not." So I have to meter that. And the way that I'm metering it, it's two different ways, right? I have very clear conversations with my son about data and data privacy and what he can and cannot share online, right? And I thankfully live in a community where it's reinforced by his school. And his school also has privacy online training for all of the students. It starts in second grade. It's kind of amazing. I don't recall ever having anything like that. Like ethical frameworks, like don't share this online. Danger, stranger online. That stuff. So these are the things that are being reinforced externally. For him, I try to reinforce that the tool is meant to make money in addition to him having a good time on it. So to recognize the signals and to unpack the gamification that leads to the addiction, I think is very important for him. And he'll shake his hand and wave at me and be like, "Whatever, Mom, I'm still going to play." And I let him, it's limited, it's like an hour a day, max. But he will repeat the things that I've told him about, "Well, they just want my money. But I still want those 800 Robux, Mom. Can I have it, please?" Is the narrative. And I say, "Yes, as long as you do your chores."
Well, I think it's very interesting that you mentioned Roblox. I've recently gotten really involved into the metaverse, and obviously you might have heard about Meta or Facebook, as some could continue to call it for several reasons. What they say about Facebook. Well, Facebook doesn't really have a good track record when it comes to our data, when it comes to our privacy. What Mark Zuckerberg wants to do with Meta is collect even more data. Because if we move to VR, we have eye tracking data, we have the data from how your room looks, the data from the stuff in your room, the data from the people in your room, the data, biometric data from your hands. So the amount of data that's being collected is going through the roof when we truly meet up with according to Mark Zuckerberg's idea of the metaverse. But if we take this a bit further. What can go wrong if companies are more like Zuckerberg? If more companies are what the heck with it, we just collect data and we use just the data to create more advanced AI. What are the things that can go wrong in society if more companies were like Facebook and we're not like Salesforce?
I mean, dystopian future, the world ends. Obviously, that's the worst part. Have you seen Ready Player One? That's obviously the outcome. And honestly, I think about that immediately when the metaverse was actually presented. That is our current state unsolvable and so meager. It's so fraught with problems that we have to create this alternative space in which to play and learn. I'm not ready to give up on planet Earth yet. Whilst I think your question is valid, and that yes, it could breed a dystopian future where most companies are just going to collect data for data's sake, and then this like data becomes our new currency, which is we're moving in that direction anyway, right? What I can only hope is that we'll have more checks and balances, like more groups such as ethical teams that are being formed to serve as counterpoint to these large sort of like data hoarding institutions effectively. I, for one, believe sincerely that the data that you produce should be your data. And I would love to one day work in an environment where you know what data you own, you know what data you produce, and you have full control over the way that it's actually applied in your environment. That for me would be a great future. I think about the medical implications almost immediately. As a cancer survivor, I want to be the owner of all of that data. I don't want it to be federated across all of these medical institutions that are then using it without my knowledge. So a future state wherein the human truly owns all of the data they produce, in my opinion, is the right future. And where they partner with businesses to then capitalize on the data that they choose to share is a totally different story. That also is, a bit bucolic, right? Like a different type of utopia, but it's one that I think about a lot.
Kai, unfortunately, we're out of time. We got to get you off the hot seat. It feels like we're just getting started. This is such a fun conversation. If anyone listening wants to learn more about your work, is there a place that you'd point them to?
About my work on Research and Insights? Well, I can tell them a little bit about my personal. Well, you can learn more about research through a couple of trails. We don't actually have a dedicated website online. We're sort of what we call Gucci. We're this federated collection of researchers that deliver against our product in situ. But more information out will be forthcoming in the next year or so. We just don't have a website yet. What you can do is you can learn more about our ethical products at einstein.ai/ethics. And that will give you a good overview of the different frameworks that I've discussed today. In particular, you can have a good understanding of where you are sort of in the maturity scale of what ethical AI is. And it gives great tips and tricks as to how to start your own ethical practice and to weave ethical mindset into the way that you build your products.
Well, we're all rooting for you. You're doing great work. Keep it up, all right?
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you, Mark, and lovely seeing you again, Dan.
Likewise. Well, that's a wrap for another episode of Between Two Bots. As your host, Dan Turchin, joined by my co-host, Dr. Mark, and we'll be back soon with another fascinating guest.
And if you enjoyed these discussions, feel free to like or subscribe or leave a comment to continue the discussion on this important topic. Guy, once again, thank you very much. And to everyone, see you on the next episode of Between Two Bots.